We were surrounded on all sides by corpses. Blood dropped slowly and languidly from every opening in their bodies. They stood up, straight and unwavering, even as the breeze blew faster and faster around us. I looked at Dmitri. He was sweating heavily, his eyes flicking left and right, his hands slowly going to the pistol hidden around his waist. Behind us, the voice came, high-pitched and cackling, shrieking with maniacal laughter and speaking in its strange way. Its voice had an almost Cockneyed or Old English twang to it, and the sound reminded me of autumn leaves crunching under a Halloween moon, or of bones being dragged across a coffin. "Aye, bleeder's disease, friend. Thee knows it is quite an unpleasant way to go. Choking on thine own fluids, thee will go beyond the veil, ye will. Quite a treat, I say, quite a treat. Nothing comes so fine on a cold night as the taste of your own blood in your mouth, 'tis true." Frothy, dark crimson blood dripped from the mouths and noses of the corpses as they stepped forward in unison. Like robots, like many members of a single hive mind. They had nearly black, clotted blood soaked into their clothes. And fresh streamers of frothy, bright red blood streamed from their mouths, ears, noses and eyes. They certainly weren't alive in any sense of the word. Just mannequins or puppets controlled by a greater intelligence. Yet despite being dead, fresh blood continued to flow from their bodies. And that greater intelligence controlling them was behind us, in the face of the demonic clown that stretched dozens of feet in the air. The face morphed and shifted, black blood running from its eyes and fanged mouth as it laughed maniacally. A sound like the shredding of metal in the silent clearing of the abandoned park. Raising his gun, Dmitri started shooting, and I wondered why we had come out to this place, where the universe was thin and monsters moved between worlds. The first time I heard the legend, I scoffed at it. I had been a senior at the local state university, sitting beside a friend in a coffee shop after classes. We talked about everyday life and politics and the news, all the facets of a conversation that is limping along. Then things took a strange turn. Dmitri turned to me with an intense look, a sly grin spread wide across his face. His flat brown eyes looked straight at me. I was slightly taken aback, staring back at him blankly, waiting for him to say something. But he just stared for a couple seconds more and sighed. The grin fell from his face. Then he began to whisper slowly. "Martin, have you ever heard about the TV at the old farmer park?" he whispered in that low, quavering voice only used for campfire stories. "You mean that abandoned amusement park in the middle of the woods?" I asked incredulously. I had heard some strange stories about that park, but I always dismissed them as the murmurings of children with overactive imaginations. He nodded eagerly. Apparently, at least according to a friend of a friend, the mirror ride with the huge clown face on the front has a TV somewhere in it. It is always on, always has power, even though none runs to the park, and he claimed it always shows somewhere else. "It sounds like someone's been pulling your leg with spooky ghost stories," I said. "I'm sure there is a TV. Maybe it even runs on some sort of battery power, but I doubt it shows anything more otherworldly than Mexican wrestling or soccer." "Then let's go look," he said, pulling out his phone and looking up the weather. "The sun doesn't set today for another 6 hours. We could drive over there, hike to it, find the TV if there is one, and hike back before dark." I knew Dmitri had a fairly successful YouTube page he was trying to grow. He liked to find underground tunnels or hidden caves or abandoned places and record himself exploring them. I smirked. "This doesn't have anything to do with you wanting to record it for some YouTube page, does it?" I asked. He smiled flatly, but his eyes seemed to show it was about something more than that. Suddenly my instincts flared, and before I knew it, my mouth was moving of its own accord. "Dmitri, you do have your gun on you, don't you?" I asked. He had a concealed carry permit, but he didn't usually carry his pistol around the campus area. He shook his head. It's at home, but that's pretty much on the way. Then let's make sure we stop on the way and grab it. I have a feeling we might see bears or, well, something worse. The day was beautiful. We drove into the town where the abandoned carnival was said to be. I opened my windows and sunroof to let in the summer breeze as Dimitri sat in my passenger seat. Even though I had never been hiking in this area, the trail was fairly easy to find. It even had an ancient rusted sign, mostly unreadable, that said, "To Farmers Park." We parked the car on the side of a desolate dirt road and began walking the wide trail to the abandoned carnival. The entire way, I felt watched. I kept turning and looking into the trees, but I saw nothing besides shadows. A few times, though, at the corner of my eye, I felt I caught quick glimpses of glowing white eyes, staring out from dark patches of the surrounding forest. Whenever I turned to look, however, they were gone. We saw the carnival up ahead, looming above the trees like the rusted bones of some ancient dinosaur. I saw a Ferris wheel with most of the carriages either hanging askew or missing, and the top of a massive clown head from the distance. When I first saw part of the face, it froze my breath in my chest. It had evil-looking spikes of fake plastic makeup forming the most demonic clown face imaginable. Its thin, spiky eyebrows came nearly together in a villainous V-shape, and the paint around its mouth formed jutting red spikes that looked like a knife. Its teeth were more like shark's teeth than any human's, and they had been covered in dust and dirt for so long that they looked decayed, brown and sickly. "This doesn't feel right," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the silent forest. As I listened, I realized that all the sounds of birds and crickets and bugs had stopped. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, far too loud in my ears, and the sense of being watched was growing more intense by the moment. "I think it's haunted," Dimitri said, looking pale, wavering on his feet slightly. He was wearing a GoPro and recording the entire thing. "I don't think it's haunted," I said. "I think there are worse things than ghosts." The presence here felt inhuman, cold, immense. It was in the way those silver and white eyes kept glowing out of the dark places in the forest in the corner of my eye. The way the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as if someone was hiding behind me and breathing on my skin. The way that cold presence seeped into my mind. We kept walking forward, slowly, looking around cautiously. The sun over here seemed dimmer. The wind blew, a slight breeze that cooled my face, and in it I thought I could smell old popcorn, fried dough, cigarette smoke, beer, hot dogs and burgers, all the smells of an amusement park that was still open. Yet this one had shut down years and years ago. We came to a metal gate that was chained shut with a padlock. Jumping over it quickly, we began to walk forwards towards the massive clown face in the park. An old spinning teacup ride passed by on our right, the cracked cups mostly flooded with water. A dead raven floated on top of the rancid water, giving out smells of decaying meat and rot. I gagged slightly, putting my hand over my face. I saw Dimitri putting his face into the crook of his elbow, trying not to breathe in the horrid smells. We came before the clown face. The entrance to the building was in the bottom of its mouth, the door shining a pure jet black, under paintings of sharp fangs held within the clown's wide reptilian grin. I looked at Dimitri, and he looked back at me. All of my instincts screamed at me to turn around and run, get the hell out of here and never come back, never even think about it again. There was something horrible and inhuman here, and we both felt it. "Let's go," he said in a whisper, and we walked through the clown's mouth together, opening the dirty white door into a totally dark corridor. We pulled out flashlights and shone them down the hall. Pieces of the ceiling and wall had fallen off, but there was nothing else visible. I looked around, wondering where the graffiti was, where the litter and signs of curious people were. There wasn't a mark of graffiti anywhere on the park, for that matter. It was as if no one wanted to stay long enough to even attempt it. Dmitri walked in front of me, and I let the door shut behind me. For some reason, I was terrified of it slamming, as if I would wake up something within the park. I closed it as slowly as possible. There was now no doubt I was being watched from all sides. I felt that being loud might draw even more eyes, however, and the thought of that sent a cold chill through my entire body. "Do you hear something?" Dmitri whispered, moving his head close to my ear. At first I was about to say no, I didn't hear anything, but then I realized I did. It was extremely faint. It sounded like a muffled news broadcast from somewhere in the building. "That's so fucking weird, man," I said in a tiny voice. I didn't even know if I was talking to Dmitri or talking to myself. We turned the corner, and up ahead I saw the flickering light of a TV shining down the hall. Dmitri and I walked into the room, looking up slowly at the old, heavy television that was mounted to the top corner of the room. A second of static and white noise flashed across, the volume up so high it seemed to vibrate the small room. The TV suddenly flicked onto a news channel. Breaking news was screaming across the screen, and a pale, tired-looking reporter came onto the screen. The hemorrhagic superflu has continued its relentless spread across the United States over the last week. The CDC estimates that deaths have exceeded 5 million a week and admits it could be substantially higher. Martial law has been declared across all 50 states, with remaining police officers being grouped with military patrols. All citizens with excess food or water must give all provisions up to military personnel who are going from house to house confiscating guns and supplies for use in maintaining the United States government and its essential personnel. According to Executive Order 637, excess supplies refers to anything beyond that which could be used to keep an individual fed and hydrated for at least 24 hours. Armed groups of resistors have reportedly tried stopping military personnel from removing all the stored foods from grocery stores. On the screen, a chaotic video began to play on the screen. It looked like it had been shot on a cell phone. The person was raising the camera, showing military personnel in black hazmat suits and gas masks surrounding a grocery store. They backed huge trucks up to it and began removing all of the food and drinks from inside. Angry citizens of the town began to throw rocks at the soldiers, and one of the soldiers opened fire. And as soon as one did, the rest instantly followed. They mowed down dozens of unarmed people in seconds, shooting whole families with automatic weapons fire. Unconfirmed reports of mass torture, sexual assaults and murders by military personnel have been common over the last week. Under Executive Order 131, however, all military personnel who commit potential crimes against citizens are exempt from prosecution until the national emergency is over. The screen shifted to a camera view of the New York City harbor, with barges filled with thousands of corpses laid into pyramids being shown. Men in gas masks and full hazmat suits were lined up by the dozens. The newsman went on with his sickening report, this alternate world where everyone was dying and everything was falling apart. The cities on the coastlines are increasingly throwing their millions of dead out into the ocean. If you are still in any of the large urban areas along the east and west coastlines, flyers will announce gathering times for the dead along the port areas. In Chicago and the central areas of the United States, open-air crematoria have been set up to deal with the endless amounts of bodies. It showed the massive Chicago Bears stadium with bulldozers smashing bleeding corpses into blazing infernos. The pile of bodies in the center looked to be dozens of people high, and it spread across most of the field. The screen changed again, flashing to a map of the United States. All areas in red have confirmed deaths from the hemorrhagic superflu, which some have called bleeder's disease or Raven's virus. I looked with horror at a map where everywhere except small patches in northern Alaska and a few in Wyoming showed a bright blood-red color. With the breakdown in hospital services and all emergency response services across the country, death rates are estimated to be over 90%, and in some cities have been reported at over 95%. Every continent, except Antarctica, now has confirmed cases. With blackouts expected across most of the country, this channel and all others will be suspending our services. Hopefully, we will return at some point. This will be our last broadcast until the national emergency is declared over. God bless America, and God help us through this time of crisis. Please pray for our country. An American flag appeared on the screen for a moment, then watched the final seconds of the broadcast, and it was those few seconds that changed my life forever. I saw with horror that this was not an alternate universe where the United States was falling. It was the future. As the final moments of the broadcast ran by, the date flashed quickly across the bottom of the screen, January 26, 2024. The building started to shake with laughter as the TV turned black, shutting off by itself. All I heard in the sheer silence that followed as the laughter cut out was my own ragged breathing, and the quick, panicked breaths of Dmitri only a foot away. We turned on our flashlights, walking through the old halls of the condemned building. A new smell had started to come into the building. I had been so engrossed in the news channel that showed that it had slipped in without me knowing it. It wasn't exactly bad, but it was strange. It smelled like wet, rich earth after a heavy rain, mixed with something fungal and almost resembling mushrooms. It was as if something old and maybe a little rotten was coming to life and breathing in these halls. A soft breeze blew from the direction of the door, reversing every few seconds. In and out. In and out. The breeze blew past me in one direction, then changed and blew back out the door. We were walking fast now, and came out of the door in a flash. We stood side by side in the fading light of the day, looking around at a semicircle of standing corpses. Behind us, we heard creaking and moaning sounds. Turning quickly, I saw the clown's face on the building changing. Its eyes closed partially, giving off a sly and evil look. Its huge, grinning mouth started to go up and down quickly, peals of laughter spilling out into the otherwise silent air. And then the breeze started. Within seconds, the wind began to blow furiously from within the forest, as if someone had flipped a supernatural switch to start some sort of windstorm. The clown spoke, its loud, mocking voice carrying easily over the strengthening torrents of wind. "Aye, friend, for when the wind blows, it is the dead screaming. The ancient ones knew this very well, they did. And when it blows fiercely and shrilly, it is because the dead be shrieking so." I turned away from the clown, looking back at the silent dead bodies of the bleeding men, women and children all around us. They numbered in the dozens. The whitish, milky eyes stared out from the bodies. They looked like puppets held up by invisible strings. They didn't stir in the slightest, didn't blink or breathe, but simply stayed where they were, assembled and frozen. I remembered all this as Dmitri drew his gun and stepped forward, shooting for his life and mine. And then I was back in the present, Dmitri shooting, blood running from the clown's mouth, the corpses with the bleeding eyes coming forward slowly, but dropping directly in front of us. Dmitri was trying to open up a path to the trail. He was a fast shooter and a great shot, and within a few seconds had already dropped 3 of them. The rest of the bodies started to slowly fill the gap, but Dmitri kept shooting until his magazine was empty, and we both saw the temporary opening. The gap he had opened up was only about 10 feet wide, and dead bodies lay on the ground that entire way, but we sprinted towards it nonetheless. I pulled a knife out of my pocket, flicking it open as bloody. Grasping hands tried to reach out for me. I got through, but Dmitri, who was a couple feet behind me, was grabbed by his sleeve. I saw it out of the corner of my eye as I jumped over the corpses, my head slightly turned, trying to watch Dmitri and make sure he was able to escape, while my adrenaline screamed at me to just abandon him now and go. He took the butt of his gun and rammed it down on the corpse who had grabbed him, an old woman with cracked, caramel-colored skin and staring cataract eyes. She looked like a hag, with a sunken face and skin that was far too loose for her small body. When Dmitri's gun connected with the front of her head, I heard the snap of bone, and she crumpled and fell. I saw a smear of blood on Dmitri's shirt where she had grabbed him, but I didn't worry about it. After that, we were both out, running down the trail at full speed, hearing the shrieking of the clown behind us. Its angry cries rang out through the woods for nearly half a mile. We stopped, bent over, trying to catch our breath. I looked at Dmitri, and he looked back at me, horror rising in his eyes. "We shouldn't have come here," he said. "This place is cursed." I nodded, and we turned and kept going. By the time the sun had gone behind the trees, we were back at the car, driving to town at 30 miles over the speed limit, trying to put as much distance between us and that place as possible. Everything I had seen had horrified me, and the worst part, in my mind, was the possibility that the monster had indeed not been showing us some alternate universe, but instead our own future. A future where bodies were thrown into the ocean by the millions and the US military shot down their fellow citizens for simply trying to get food. Dmitri texted me later the day that he wasn't feeling well. He said he had started coughing up a little bit of blood, and that his head pounded like nails were being driven into his forehead. I told him that it was probably nothing, but knowing better, and that date kept playing through my head, over and over. January 26th, 2024.